Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and since this year has been an absolutely wild ride of new announcements, changing release dates, and newly confirmed release dates, I thought it'd be a good idea to revisit my most anticipated games of the year, focusing purely on what's left of the year ahead, with a degree of release date confidence. Unlike my pair of annual videos that I release at the beginning of every year where I split the genres up a little, this one's going to be a mixed bag of strategy, tactical, sim, management, and city building gaming, and the focus is purely on games with confirmed release dates for this year without any room for speculation, so no TBDs or TBAs or any of that. Now, if you do want to see a wider list of games coming out this and now early next year, check out the links in the pinned comment down below, and if you find these games interesting, don't hesitate to subscribe, as you're likely to see a lot of coverage of them and others like them on the channel. Now, if you have any recommendations or thoughts of your own, drop them in the comments down below, and if you enjoy this video, hit that like button. With all that said, and with timestamps down below, there is no more time to waste, so let's begin. Aquatico is set to release Q3 of this year, and it's looking like a very interesting take on the survival city building genre. The game is set on the ocean floor in the near future, after the Earth's surface has become a barren wasteland, so, about 10 or so years from now, more or less. As you build your underwater city, you'll be pursuing a lot of familiar elements of the genre, but under new circumstances. How does infrastructure look in an underwater city, for example? Or what kind of resources do you need, and how do you go about procuring them? What kind of production chains are you dealing with, and how can you go about upgrading them? Or what kind of technology are you researching in the so-called vast research tree, so on and so forth. Of particular note is the vertical city building, where you're seeing platforms at higher levels and enclosed spaces within which you're actually adding additional substructures, sort of like the domes in a game like Surviving Mars. This should allow for a greater degree of flexibility, and if it works anything like Surviving Mars, should create a new layer of consideration and management with regards to what things are connected directly versus which elements require some form of commute or another. It opens up additional points of consideration as you design your cities and infrastructure, and it has been rather interesting in other games that have pursued it. The last major point of note is the Frostpunk-esque map, where you can send expeditions out to explore, rescue other survivors, or bring back additional resources. Aquatico boasts a narrative campaign as well as a sandbox mode, and I think the distinct aesthetic coupled with the relatively unique setting has piqued my interest over here. Survival city builders have become quite common over these last few years especially, so I'm always curious to see how new contenders stand out from the crowd. We don't yet know exactly when this year Victoria 3 will release, but we did get a confirmation that it's definitely happening this year. From the historical setting of this Victorian-era grand strategy game to its claims of being a socio-economic simulator, my interest in Vicky 3 has been maxed out since it was first revealed, and based on the dev diaries and gameplay we've seen so far, the game is looking very promising. You'll be able to choose from a large number of nations and, if I understand correctly, organizations that held territory during this tumultuous time, and you'll lead them through an era of great change. Technological, yes, but also social, political, and economic. Each individual in your nation has their own wants and needs, and through policy change and trade, as well as controlling what kinds of industries are built where in your country, each of these individuals will be able to seek employment, earn money, and spend that money to acquire those needed and wanted goods. The price of goods fluctuates based on supply and demand, and so you need to balance your production of goods and their import against your nation's GDP and your people's ability to afford them. Will the downtrodden have a voice in your society with cheap grain and affordable clothing as a priority? Will the wealthy elite get high-end luxury shoes with logos on the bottom to leave little marks on the homeless people they walk over on the way to the arcade? You'll need to be careful about who you empower and who you upset. Revolutions will brew, and those in power will determine the kind of policies and actions you can or cannot push. One cannot make a beacon of capitalism without the exploitation of the laborer, just as one cannot make a communist utopia without cutting the bourgeoisie down to size. Victoria 3 promises this extremely in-depth socioeconomic simulator driven by political impacts, technological change, and disparity in an era of colonizers and the colonized. War features less prominently in this game than most, and the devs have even said that a game can be won without ever fighting a war at all, using diplomatic posturing familiar to the era instead, building alliances, making threats, and carefully balancing nationalistic tendencies on the brink of wars unlike any ever seen before. I am really excited for Victoria 3. Exploring economic simulations and their impact on society is always something I've found compelling, and I am very curious to see if Paradox have pulled it off here. Pentiment is set to release November of this year, having just been announced a few weeks ago, and I have to say, I think it stole the show around Summer Game Fest and the PC Gaming Show. Set in Germany during the early 16th century, Pentiment is certainly an outlier in this list, but I think it's one that many of you might be interested in. As a historical mystery RPG, it's driven by a compelling narrative and a unique context that involves political, social, and religious strife in the era. And as a role-playing game, you play as a character who's a bit of a dying breed, an illustrator invited to a scriptorium to help illuminate a manuscript. As you're doing so, and as you're coming close to finishing your project, a murder takes place, and your best friend and mentor is the top suspect, and you take it upon yourself to prove their innocence. Over the course of 20 or so years, you participate in this Renaissance-era whodunit murder mystery while the world around you undergoes revolution and change, the Reformation, the Peasants' War in Germany, so on and so forth. There are multiple factions to deal with multiple relationships to manage, and there will be difficult decisions to make, including who to point the finger at in order to save your friend and mentor. Between its beautiful art style, its compelling setting, and the developer's penchant for building extremely good narratives, I am really curious to see how Pentiment plays and feels when it releases November of this year. Circus Electrique is looking like a new addition to a long line of Darkest Dungeon-style games set in a Victorian-era steampunk London. The game pits your literal circus crew against various archetypical Londoners of the era who have somehow undergone a transformation that has made them all into violent and ruthless killers. Your circus crew, as a result, is the only thing able to save the city and restore order as you go about fighting turn-based tactical battles and managing your motley crew of fire breathers, strongmen, jugglers, clowns, and more. 15 different classes of characters will have access to their own unique skills, attributes, special abilities, and all, changing how they fight, defend, or support their allies when working together, and each of these 15 can be mixed and matched together to form adventuring bands of 4 at a time, who traverse individual city maps, engaging in battles, seeking out loot, coming across events, and much more besides. Many of the battle mechanics will be familiar if you've played Darkest Dungeon or any of the games inspired by it. The positioning of your 4 performers will determine which of their abilities they'll be able to use at any given time, and swapping their positions around strategically can give you the upper hand, while using abilities that disrupt enemy positioning can further damage their opportunities. Different abilities can hit different positions on either side of the field with support or damage output, and the pushing and pulling makes a huge difference mid-battle as you try to target the more threatening enemies or try to avoid particular resistances, or maybe perhaps try to take advantage of certain weaknesses unique to a specific enemy on the battlefield. Managing morale to ensure higher damage output and hit chances is one thing, but making sure it doesn't dip so low that a performer leaves your circus is a whole different ballgame. But it looks like your circus will allow you to recruit more performers and train them, all of which will require resources that you earn primarily through planning and executing entire circus performances. Saying Circus Electrique has a unique setting is an understatement, and I'm very curious to see how it plays when it releases later this year. Marvel's Midnight Suns is an exciting, not XCOM game from the folks famous for making the new XCOM games. Set to release October 7th of this year, this turn-based tactical RPG puts you in charge of a fully customizable superhero that's joining the ranks of the Midnight Suns, a reference, I think, to the Midnight Suns, spelled with an O, which is a group of supernatural superheroes in the Marvel Universe. The playable roster revealed so far includes Iron Man, Captain America, Wolverine, Spider-Man, Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, Blade, Ghost Rider, Magic, and Nico Minoru, as well as, of course, your own customizable character, the Hunter. The third-person RPG mechanics include all the familiar elements of exploration, conversation, moral compass management, and making friends with your superhero counterparts through conversations, as well as what the game calls hangouts, seemingly special social events that'll further your relationships with your friends. The RPG systems also include improving your characters and unlocking or upgrading the cards that you'll be doing battle with. See, combat in Marvel's Midnight Suns is taking on a very unexpected turn, one that I was a little unsure about when it was first revealed, but one I remain excited to test out before I make a judgment call. Though it's a turn-based tactics game with full 3D environments that need to be traversed while engaging the enemy, all of your actions are determined by what cards you've drawn from your deck for any given turn. The attacks you can perform, which characters will have a chance to do anything to begin with, and what sort of actions you can synergize are all determined by the heart of the cards. And this creates an interesting dynamic where your superheroes can still absolutely be very super, but they're limited by the cards that you drew. I think it's a clever way to let your superheroes feel superpowered without having to nerf them when they take on mooks and low-level enemies, and I'm curious to see if it'll translate the high-octane, action-packed fighting that I would expect from most of this ensemble. Either way, with an October 7th release date, we're not too far from finding out just how well all of this works, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Farthest Frontier is the extremely enticing sci-fi strategy game set to release later this year that has had me absolutely enthralled since I first came across it early last year. With a narrative campaign that boasts a compelling world and in-depth mechanics spread across base building, resource collection and distribution, supply chain management, ship design, crew management, recon, and more besides, Farthest Frontier is probably one of the most exciting space sci-fi games I've seen in a while, and the fact that it'll be shipping with a scenario editor that lets players make their own star systems, event chains, and stories means it'll have legs for a while to come. Some of the most compelling elements to me are the way resources are physicalized, meaning they can only be used where they actually exist, which means you'll need to manage the flow of goods to important stations so they can build military as well as civilian craft as needed. This makes defending and attacking supply chains all the more important, which is something that I don't think gets depicted often enough in strategy games, at least in my humble opinion, especially in sci-fi ones. The importance of recon and intelligence gathering, the consideration for elements like radar shadows and electrical signature sizes, and the cost of every little decision like balancing range versus radius of recon stations shows how much meticulous thought is going into every aspect of the game, including simply finding your enemies so that you can mount an assault or prepare to defend appropriately. Beyond that, the fact that ship battles use physical ballistics to determine what components are hit and if critical hits will cause instant destruction or not is very impressive, and the fact that you can go in after a battle to rescue or imprison crew in order to retain skilled individuals or interrogate enemy specialists adds a whole other layer to the game. The atmosphere in Farthest Frontier is absolutely next level too, and the music is all composed uniquely for the game as well, all giving a very specific and ominous feeling that fits the whole space opera vibe the game seems to be going for. I remain as excited for Farthest Frontier today as I did when I first saw it, if not even more so, and I cannot wait to get into it when I can, finally, later this year. F1 Manager 2022 was announced relatively recently, and with the release date set for August 30th, I'm really excited to get my hands on it later this year. Formula 1 is a very exciting format of racing. I've always loved the complexity of managing tire strategies, improving car performance, tweaking specific details of the vehicle setup, and looking after the needs of the larger team beyond the drivers as well. Mechanics, engineers, pit crew, so on and so forth. F1 Manager 2022 seems to be addressing all of these compelling aspects of the sport as it puts you in charge of a team and their associated objectives across multiple seasons, making you responsible for everything that goes on during a season. Between races, you'll be ensuring your R&D teams are improving various parts of the car, each of which can provide various benefits needed across the various tracks spread across the season, and you'll also look to ensure your engineers are making tweaks to existing parts to get the most out of the car. During race weekends, you'll participate in practice sessions to prepare your drivers, qualifying sessions to determine where on the grid they'll start, and of course, the race itself. And all of this will be shown using broadcast-style cameras with some fantastic visuals. The race day management has been shown off a fair bit, and apart from determining when to pit and adapting to evolving circumstances, you'll be telling your two drivers how hard they should be pushing or conserving their tires and their fuel, how aggressively they should be driving in general, and whether they should be competing with each other or letting one another pass. Controversial decisions at times, but with access to all the telemetry data, you'll be able to see how your and your opponent's cars are performing and make those tough choices on the fly. If you played Codemasters Motorsport Manager, this is feeling like a souped-up version of that game dedicated to Formula 1 racing, and it's looking absolutely brilliant. Whether you're a fan of the sport or you're just curious about it, I think it's worth keeping an eye on to really get an understanding for just how involved the sport really is and how interesting it can be. I cannot wait to get on this one. Farthest Frontier is another survival city builder set to release on the 9th of August, and it looks to present a fittingly brutal representation of what living life on the frontier of civilization might actually be like. Apart from contending with bandits and their occasional raids, you'll be struggling with the elements as harsh climate shifts and a complex farming and resource system take center stage. The game's Steam page boasts about 10 food crops, each with unique growing characteristics that require you to manage soil fertility and climate shifts, while also talking about raw materials like wood, clay, honey, herbs, and about 17 different types of food and over 30 types of crafted items too. Like I said, a complex resource system is at the heart of this game, clearly, and I'm very excited to see what kind of supply and production chain management comes with all of that as you're building an ever-growing city out of up to 50 different types of buildings, all while fighting disease and environmental threats as well. I'm really looking forward to Farthest Frontier, even though we haven't seen any gameplay really at all yet. I'm hoping to get my hands on it as soon as possible to showcase it on the lead up to and after its August 7th release date. It sounds right up my alley. 2 Point Campus will also be releasing on the 9th of August, and it's the much-awaited follow-up to 2 Point Hospital. 2 Point Campus puts you in charge of a university campus in the familiar style where you're dealing with quirky themes like night school or wizardry or really wacky robotics classes, but the underlying management elements are actually quite compelling and challenging despite the fun and cheeky appearances. I quite like the sense of humor of these kinds of games, and if 2 Point Hospital is anything to go by, 2 Point Campus is going to be a very fun game where you try to manage both staff and students as you lead them through formative years of their academic and social careers. Creating spaces for learning, studying, and playing will be crucial, and hiring and looking after the staff to maintain and manage it all goes without saying. The devs have said the hope is to create what they're calling a curated sandbox experience where players are given a bunch of objectives that they can tackle as they please at their own pace as school goes from in session to out of session for the summer holidays. A very interesting and unique element to play with given the context. I'm really looking forward to 2 Point Campus. I always think a management game that can balance a sense of humor and management against each other is a great time, and 2 Point Campus looks like it's going to pull it off once more for the team at 2 Point Studios. Terra Invicta has been on my most anticipated list for quite some time now, but it should be right around the corner now, especially after its demo at the recent Steam Next Fest. I have another video linked in the pinned comment down below where I dive a lot deeper into the game, and many compare it to the 3-body problem. I can't speak to that, but I can definitely give you an overview for this hard sci-fi 4X strategy game from the folks behind the Long War mod for XCOM. Set in the present day, Terra Invicta presents you with a world that has just encountered irrefutable evidence that aliens have arrived at the edge of our solar system. Picking from one of the several factions, you take charge of a group of experts with a variety of goals. Where one faction might seek to destroy the alien, another might hope to serve it, another might look to eradicate them and any of their human sympathizers, while others still might seek to escape Earth and find a new home to stay safe. Each faction has its own twist, and as a result, its own set of objectives, and after you pick a faction to lead, you'll find yourself using your counselors to go around the world, convincing nations to join your cause or to abandon that of your opposing factions. Each nation has access to a variety of resources, and as you spread your influence strategically across countries to gain access to these resources, you'll be causing wars, assassinating or intercepting enemy counselors, researching new technologies with a global community or sometimes in secret for your own faction, and influencing the development of nations under your control as well. With the appropriate resources in hand, you'll soon be able to push into space, establishing space stations and bases on the moon as well as countless other celestial bodies in our solar system, all in the hopes of acquiring more advanced resources or to establish forward operating bases, refueling stations, and early warning systems. Ultimately, this will allow you to enter the next phase of the game where you're designing and building your own spaceships, flying them across the system using real-world physics, considerations, and methodologies, and leading them in battle against other factions and the aliens themselves using a rather complex system where things like facing, momentum, delta V, and more come into the equation. Terra Invicta does not intend to be a simple game. It's definitely a challenging one with a lot of moving parts, and between that and the premise itself, I think Terra Invicta is an extremely interesting title, well worth keeping an eye on. I've been sweet on Sweet Transit since it was first revealed, and playing the alpha earlier this year followed by the demo at Steam Next Fest a few weeks ago only furthered my interest in the game as it prepares to release on July 28th. I have a deeper dive into the game on the channel, and I'll link that in the pinned comment down below as well, but to put it briefly, Sweet Transit is a blend between city builder and railroad tycoon management game that looks to challenge the player on both fronts equally. Starting with a blank, procedurally generated map, you pick where to build your first city, and starting from a small village with a few houses, water towers, and a fishery or two, you slowly grow it, unlocking more construction options as your population increases, opening up more types of goods and more ways to keep your citizens happy. Building these structures requires raw materials though, and so you must establish a warehouse somewhere on the map, and you need to set up the resource collection buildings themselves as well. Coal mines to get coal for your trains to run on, lumber mills to get wood to build houses with, so on and so forth. Then you need to establish the actual rail lines connecting all these buildings, ensuring the proper flow of goods. And then, as your city grows, you'll need different kinds of goods, so you'll need to expand your production capabilities alongside your town, and you'll need to expand your rail network too. You look at the tourism industry for your cities, as well as maintaining a steady flow of migrants to keep laborers coming to your town, and you'll not just be moving goods around, but people too, making sure fresh workers arrive at industrial buildings to keep them running efficiently, keeping your people well fed, housed, and happy, all as things grow more and more complex. You'll manage train signals, you'll design junctions, you'll actually design trains and design the lines they'll be driving on as well, and you'll even be making modular train stations, individually placing platforms, determining their length, and making sure they're accessible for trains and people alike. Sweet Transit is a very pretty game with some very interesting ideas that all play together very nicely. I'm really looking forward to this one. Clanfolk is a relatively recent discovery for me, and its release date is right around the corner, set for July 14th. The quickest way to refer to it would be a medieval RimWorld style life and colony simulator, but it takes a unique approach to many aspects to keep itself fresh and interesting. You play as a family looking to make its home somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. You can pick from preset clans, make your own clan from scratch, or edit an existing one, determining 3 generations of your clan to start the game with, alongside any livestock they might bring with them. After that, you're immediately thrust into an empty plot of land where you try to build up your homestead and survive the harsh whims of nature. Your family members all have a huge variety of aspects that impact their mood. They can be set to a multitude of tasks with their efficiency determined by a combination of their skill level and their current mood, and as they go about performing tasks, they'll learn more ways in which they can take advantage of the world around them. Gather branches to learn how to make branch fences and walls or to assemble basic tools. Cut down grass to unlock access to hay structures. Cut down trees to gain access to logs and later timber, so on and so forth. In this way, your tech tree, so to speak, advances through the actions you take, unlocking a huge variety of items and unlocking a huge variety of new actions and tasks to go with them. From skinning the results of a successful hunt to make clothes, to digging up clay and making pots to store water, there are all sorts of interesting ways in which your people will grow over time. The seasons play a crucial and challenging role in Clanfolk, with every season being particularly good for a specific set of circumstances, while being particularly poor for others. As the seasons come and go, you'll be more or less likely to find certain types of food to forage, for example, and you'll be more or less likely to farm certain types of crops. Surviving winter is a serious challenge, and your work through prior seasons all comes together, with some tasks lasting across multiple seasons for best results. Clanfolk is full of very interesting mechanics, and it's wildly deep with regards to things like soil management, fertility, and family and animal management, where you'll see your clanfolk nurse each other back to health or look after their livestock or their young. It's really quite beautiful, and I haven't even touched on the option to trade with other clans and build relations with them in order to gain access to more valuable goods, or perhaps the option to make an inn where travelers can come and stay, paying in coin if they enjoy their time. And there's the option to hire workers to help your family if you're in desperate need of more hands. Clanfolk is a very exciting upcoming prospect, and I've had the chance to play a fair bit of it as I actually help the developers and publishers out with some of their marketing materials. I think there's just a really good time to be had here for fans of the subgenre looking for something with a bit of a twist. There's no warfare, there's no military aspect, just you, your family, their home, and their will to survive the harsh Scottish Highlands. Q2 and Q3 of 2022 are looking absolutely packed with some very exciting games, and I would love to hear your thoughts on these, as well as any others you're personally excited for in the comments down below. I know Manor Lords is very popular, and I'm really excited for it too, but it does still have a to-be-announced release date, and like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm trying to avoid any speculation here. All the games you heard me talk about today are, well, unless something changes obviously, but they should be releasing in the next handful of months, and I'm really excited to dive into them. Again, for more exciting games that might be releasing between later this and early next year, don't hesitate to check out the videos I've linked in the pinned comment down below and the one linked on screen right now. And for more strategy gaming content, don't hesitate to subscribe. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time. Cheers.